Welcome back. Another episode of ChadrickTech. In this episode, we're going to get started with some results. It dawned on me that it was about a year ago that I was starting on compiling and doing the testing on the Intel, how to keep a 14th gen Intel CPU cool. As I was working through pictures, and it was my phone tries to be smart and say, hey, look what you were doing last year about the same time. And wow, it's been a year. But let's keep the good times rolling, and let's kick off this how to keep an AM5 platform by looking at two Optimus blocks. So I mentioned in my testing plan that I wanted to see if there was really a difference between the two Optimus signature blocks that they're selling for the AM5 platform. Now, it runs deeper here than just the color of the block. This one in my right hand and your left, it is an aluminum top. It is much lighter than this block. This block is a full brass block. Now, that's not where the differences end. I think they use the same cold plate and same design. They say, Optimus told me when I inquired, there's an insert in here and the water loop doesn't actually touch the aluminum, so you're not mixing metals in your loop. But it cools to the similar degree, is what they told me. And I wanted to see exactly what does that mean, the similar degree. And on the back of the block, where you've got the cold plate, there's another difference. On the aluminum top has a bare copper cold plate, and the sort of the anodized full brass heavy block has a nickel-plated cold plate. Now, if you want the best cooling, you're going to want the raw copper, but it doesn't wear as well over time as a nickel-plated cold plate. Most people will say the performance is negligible, but there might be a slight benefit to having the raw copper over the nickel-plated. Especially when you get into looking at liquid metal, there's not much of scarring or changing here on the nickel surface, although it will wear over time. But when you use liquid metal on bare copper, you do get some scarring. It took a lot of polishing to try to get it to look that nice again with some Flitz polish. But I want to take an opportunity and start putting out some of the information that I'm collecting. There's testing going on continually. The AMD system's running in the background as we speak. But let's take a peek and see if a nice showdown and see how well these blocks perform using two different pastes and liquid metal. Let's check out the data. All right, let's take a peek at this information. First, we're going to start right off the bat with an Optimus block showdown. Okay, so the test bench, and I don't want to belabor a lot of these slides because I went through this in the methodology. If you want to really understand how this is set up and how many and a lot more details, check out the previous video. I made an introduction video, and I also made a methodology video. This is the first one that is going to be the showdown showing some data. All right, and so really the only difference in the test bench is I contemplating just throwing a GPU in the system, but then when I went back and looked at my Intel testing, I realized that's really kind of pointless. It doesn't matter what GPU I have in it, and if I use the integrated graphics, that's only going to stress the CPU that much more and add to the heat. Everything else is pretty much set here. I did make mention that I was going to probably turn down the pump, and I locked it at 2 liters per minute. Okay, so the hardware that we tested is the Optimus V3 water blocks, one aluminum top, solid brass. So you got a chance to see those in my intro there. Look at the weight difference, 277 grams for the aluminum top versus one that is almost 1.6 pounds. It is a beast. But then that's what I've come to expect because I have 3 or so signature V3s for the Intel, and they're all that heavy, big chunks of metal. And when I got the first Optimus water block with the aluminum top, I immediately reached out to them and go, "Is this real? Like, I'm confused. I was expecting, you know, when the box showed up, it wasn't that heavy, and I'm like, this can't be it." But they assured me that it does have the similar performance, and so we're going to see what that is. And then I shared the mounting hardware. It's the same from block to block, just whether you what color of hardware that you have. Software, again, I went through this before, but I wanted to update my versions. So the versions that I'm using of each of these pieces of software are listed for you here. If you're interested in that and trying to replicate it, I'm not trying to hide any information, how I'm doing the test, what versions I'm doing, how I'm setting everything up, how I'm reporting the information. I hope you're finding interest in that. I realize it can be a little dry, but I'm trying to do some adequate testing here, and so I'm trying to make sure that you guys understand exactly what I've done. So in order to gauge the performance, there's three tests: performance tests, Cinebench R23 and R24. And again, I ran these tests in the OEM settings and in a PBO setting, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I had to run all of these in like the OEM setting BIOSes, and then did it again for each of the paste and block. And for temperature, I used Prime 95 OCCT. I took out 8 and 95. I've omitted one. This is a lot, guys. I'm looking for ways to make sure I can get through this and do it timely. I want to be able to crank through this so that you guys can have some benefits here of knowing what would be best. I went through that I'm going to normalize the temperature results to 22 degrees Celsius, and that way when I'm using water temp, the temperatures are directly comparable. If you don't normalize, ambient temperature can throw off your CPU temps, and you have to account for that variable. Not only ambient temps, but more importantly, we're running custom loop here, and your water temp is very important. Think if you were running through a chiller. If you chill it or use liquid nitrogen to keep everything like below zero, you can push the CPU a lot harder, and it hopefully will survive, right? But the same premise is when you're trying to compare different blocks, different pace, you have to account for these variables. And my attempt at that is to normalize my water temps, and then you can compare the CPU temps because you have the same situational water temp running through the block. Okay, and then we'll go through averages. This is just like I did my Intel side. That information's out there if you're interested in learning this, but we're getting started here with the AMD. OEM settings is basically I set the BIOS to default, and then I enabled the Expo profile. That's it. That's OEM settings. Didn't tweak a thing. PBO settings, and I know that this could come under heavy fire because I've spent a lot of time stressing over this one, because there's no real hard and fast rule when you say, well, enable PBO. There's so many different options within the BIOS, and there's ways to customize your PBO settings. Well, mine runs best at this. You really should set it like the following. No, you should have set it this way. I know there's going to be lots of different opinions, and I know there's going to be ways for it to run cooler, and I know there's probably ways that it'll run faster. So how do you overclock something? Just like I did with the Intel side, I didn't tweak a bunch of settings. I just set it to XTU, crank the multiplier, go. Lots of heat, lots of speed, get really hot, figure it out. In the same fashion, I enabled PBO and set my limit to 95 degrees Celsius. That's sort of where I went. Is there ways to do it better? I know, without shadow of a doubt, know that there probably is. But my attempt is to generate heat. Crank the CPU, throw some voltage at it, see where the heat goes, and rely on the effectiveness of the cooler in the loop and the thermal material to keep the CPU cool enough and let it sort everything out. So this is where we separate the men from the boys, right? Which cooler, which thermal material is going to be able to perform the best. Within the testing that I've already reviewed, there are a number of tests that work with the Optimus blocks. And I'm going to look at Hydronaut paste, Duranaut paste, and liquid metal. So as it stands right now, that's test 5, 6, 11, 12, 17, and 18. So Hydronaut on each of the Optimus aluminum and brass, Duranaut aluminum and brass, liquid metal aluminum and brass, and it's just the contact frame. We haven't delidded. We're just going to keep the lid on, do this comparison, and see where everything falls out. So this is how, and this is a screenshot basically from the Intel data that I've done, and I wanted to set it up very similar so that I'm being very regimented about this. You'll see that I do have heat spreaders for the AM5, and I will delid, and I'll use liquid metals. All this stuff really is the same. If I didn't tell you it was from the Intel stuff, you probably wouldn't know any different. So the all of this data will be collected for Prime 95. This is a single Prime 95 run with a heat spreader, liquid metal on the die, liquid metal on top of the heat spreader, using the Optimus block, and what was my initial, my post-water temp, my delta, my CPU temps, initial and max, and normalized value to 22 degrees, and lots of other data that I collected. Out of all of this data, this normalized CPU temp got put into the basic result of the temperature data that I'll report to you. So, and then you had to do it for OCCT. Then you had to do it for Cinebench 23, 24, performance test. And all of these temperatures normalized, went into a table, look at the value. We're going to give an average or a mean, and then see where all the different blocks and configurations pan out. Okay, that's how this is set. So the Optimus temperatures with the OEM settings. We have organized this. This is the contact frame, the OEM IHS, so the lid's still on with OEM solder. That's between the die and the IHS. And then what did we put on top between the IHS and the cooler? 2 different coolers, 3 different mediums: Hydronaut, Duranaut, liquid metal. What was the coolest? Well, the brass with liquid metal ran at 61.3 average temp. And then you can see as it goes down the list here. The Hydronaut, surprisingly, was a close second. Duranaut was in third. The brass took the top 3 spots when you're using OEM settings. And then the aluminum took the last 3 spots. Now it's going to look really funny because liquid metal took the last spot with the aluminum block. And you think that's not supposed to happen. Hydronaut's not supposed to be the second place winner either. But let's focus on liquid metal right now. Liquid metal was not supposed to run the hottest. Okay, so I left this in here on purpose because you and I both know that if you're going to cool something and you want to get the maximum cooling out of something, I've already established that that is with liquid metal in the Intel side, and it's already off and running in the same form and fashion with these Optimus coolers. Now, why did the aluminum block have the highest average temperature with liquid metal? And I could have redone all of this and published a really nice number and made the numbers look great. I could have just went ahead and redone it when I realized there was an issue, but I decided I was going to leave it in. Here's my goof. I'm leaving it in to teach you something, that liquid metal is very finicky, okay? And you have to make sure that you get good contact and good clamping force, and you have to be very careful with it because it'll run on you, right? And then it's electrically conductive, so you have to be very careful with it. So my AMD test bench sits upright. The board doesn't lay flat. And so I applied the liquid metal upright in both situations to see if I could do it. The brass I started with first. I did the brass one first, and it ran fine. So I cleaned up from the aluminum block, doing the pace, and when I went to set the liquid metal, it didn't seat evenly. And the liquid metal migrated before I could get the block cinched up there. and there was squished down instead of evenly pressed on the die of the or on the IHS, excuse me. So that inconsistent pressure and application of liquid metal resulted in higher temps that you're seeing here. So this is the public service announcement to prove that these temps aren't horrible, but they're not great either. You can get much better performance with liquid metal, as I've proven with the brass block. And you can see when you're looking at paste, they're all right there together. The Duranaut is 62, about 63 degrees. Hydronaut, surprisingly, was a little better on the brass than it was on the aluminum, but it's respectable. They pulled about the same amount of watts, scored about the same. What happens when you enable PBO? This is where we separate the men from the boys, right? So the liquid metal, again, on the brass block was the best performer. And then, as you would expect, since I didn't have good contact with the liquid metal on the aluminum block, it went to 96.5 degrees. So it did not do well because I didn't have good contact. The overall average, if I omit the poor contact, was about 88 degrees versus 89, so not a huge difference. But the liquid metal should have done better to drop my averages because it should have been closer to what I had with the brass block. As a result of that, it was about 14% worse than the brass block. But when you look at the pastes, the Duranaut and the Hydronaut, all right in there around 87 to 88 degrees. So 2 to 3 degrees better using liquid metal than paste. Okay, so when you're looking at the OEM performance, if you see the OEM scores, they're not sorted correctly in this table, but the liquid metal Optimus brass did not take the top spot. Surprisingly, a paste took the top spot, and then the brass took second place. But again, it's to show you that the liquid metal, because you didn't have really good contact, it had a hard time staying in the throttle and generating the best scores. What I find interesting in the PBO performance is that the liquid metal did not have the highest scores, even though they would run cooler. The Hydronaut and Duranaut paste actually performed equally as well with performance as the liquid metal did. It's just if you're concerned about getting the best temperatures. In the power requirements from OEM to the PBO, you're looking at about the same wattage throughout the testing. Again, you didn't get a chance to really put a lot of watts into the liquid metal aluminum because your contact was poor. So let's summarize the OEM settings here. If you're looking at liquid metal and the brass block, it had the lowest temps. It pulled the most wattage, but it actually didn't get the highest score, but it's within reason, right? So the highest was the aluminum Duranaut at 29,243, and the liquid metal was 29,234. So you're right there. The temperatures are only maybe a couple degrees difference, so the Duranaut performs very well, and these Optimus blocks are able to transmit a lot of heat. If you're looking at the PBO setting summary, if the Optimus brass and liquid metal had the lowest temps, highest wattage, but not the fastest scores again, for whatever reason, it was the Hydronaut that took the, for the aluminum block, that took the winning score, but definitely not in terms of shedding the heat. And, but regardless, they're all within close range of each other, but the liquid metal has the lowest temperatures, as you would expect. So let's look just at the thermal medium. So what were my averages and what was the percent change for all of my averages? Of the blocks that use Hydronaut, it was about 63.3 degrees. And it was, Duranaut was about 0.5% lower, like 63 degrees. And liquid metal was on average 61.3 degrees. So 2 degrees difference and improvement, liquid metal. Is that worth running your warranty? You be the judge, because you didn't delid your CPU, but if you run liquid metal and you wear the letters and numbers off the IHS lid, you don't have a warranty claim that will be valid because they can't read your processor data. So it voids your warranty. So if you're going to do that, you might as well delid and go for it, right? So what's the best paste you can use right now? It looks like the Duranaut ekes out the win over Hydronaut, but does that get better or worse when you use PBO? Well, the Hydronaut had an 89.2 degree average, Duranaut 87.7, and liquid metal 84.5. So, moving liquid metal out of the way because it's going to have the best performance. Duranaut took the second spot at a couple of degrees cooler when you're trying to push your CPU. Now, what about the water block? The brass versus the aluminum. And again, I want to point out that I took out the outlier in the liquid metal. That's an N of 1 because I know that wasn't going to help us because I had poor contact. It's not valid data when you try to compare apples to apples. Again, it's the same thing. With the aluminum block, it's an N of 2 instead of an N of 3. And the water block, brass water block, had an average of 61.9. And the aluminum had an average of 64 degrees. Under PBO settings, they were identical. That's interesting, right? So you did see a benefit, a slight edge of the brass, the weight, the metal, but it didn't come to fruition under PBO settings. So which do you choose? I I don't think I can really say that the brass is that much better than the aluminum. I prefer to have the weight of that block just because I feel like I've purchased something. But the aluminum block is cheaper than if you were going to buy the brass block. And so when you factor in the money, which I didn't weigh into the cost perspective here, they're both top of the line blocks, and I wouldn't hesitate to buy the aluminum version. It did just fine. They're both excellent. And these are going to go up against other blocks that I've mentioned in my methodology video prior to. So this isn't the last you're going to see of these Optimus blocks. They're going head to head with the rest of them, and it shows also that you have to respect liquid metal and you have to take your time and make sure you get it. You don't make a mess with it. B, maybe I need to do a video on liquid metal application because as many times as I've done it, I still had an issue with this testing. And I think that's important to highlight. Even people who are comfortable using liquid metal can still have issues. And if I was going to do this again in the future, I just wanted to see if I could do it with it being upright. But you have to put liquid metal on the surface that needs to cool, and you have to also apply it to the surface of the block. So on the CPU die or the lid or whatever you're applying it to, and the block as well, a light coat, so that they'll mate and transfer the heat evenly. And again, as I had to try to put a little bit more, I could watch it. I put a little bead at the top, it run down. And I spent time moving it up the IHS, trying to make sure it stayed up there and stayed even, and then quickly put the block on it. And so obviously I'm 1 for 2. And if we're going to do this in the future, I'm going to lay it down and seat everything and make sure that it's set right, and then set the case back up again to see if that can get consistent numbers. And that's the way I did it before. I just wanted to see if I could do it and not move my test bench around a lot. And I'm 1 for 2. I realize you can't do that. So consider that a public service announcement for everybody else out there using liquid metal. This was an unintended public service announcement, but that one's free for the group. So again, more to come. I hope you've enjoyed this initial results video of the Optimus blocks. They're both excellent. Run out and get one. Stay safe. God bless.